can't ever forget the cold night in February when I received a phone call. And I remember picking it up, and before anything was even said, I knew something terrible had happened to Gerda. And I can recall vividly my drive to the hospital. I can remember what the cold air felt like as I walked to my car, and I remember just hearing the tyres going along on a road. It was silent, there was snow that was falling. And then I can remember the walk from the car park up to the hospital and just praying. I think every single one of us would do, that it wasn't going to be as bad as what I thought it was. And I remember being told how her youngest son, at the age of 18, had found her hanging. And it doesn't matter how many years will go by, it doesn't matter how many decades, it doesn't matter what will happen. That memory for me will stay as fresh to the day I die. Let me tell you a bit about Gerda. So Gerda was born in Punjab, which is in northwest India, on a very bright and sunny 13th of February 1960. In 1970, at the age of 10, she came to the UK, and 9 years later, at the tender age of 19, she was married to the man who I am absolutely 100% sure was the reason and cause of her death. He, her husband, started to limit who my sister could and was allowed to see. He made sure that no male relatives were allowed to communicate with her. Over time, the abuse escalated and the control became much, much worse. Gerda's husband was arrested for murder, and I still, again, there are many memories and emotions that you pick up, but I can still remember feeling the hope that justice would prevail, and he would get his comeuppance. My sister died because of psychological and physical abuse she suffered, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, and decade after decade. There was no stop to this. But the law then was very lacking in so many ways. Even though her body was black and blue, and she had kept diaries detailing the abuse, her husband walked away a free man. The psychological injury she was deemed to have suffered at his hands just didn't count. At the time, because it wasn't considered a crime. The injustice and the irrationality of this decision and its consequence for Gerda, for her family, for me, was and still is very difficult to bear.
Abused women continue to take their lives, just as Gerda did. Still today, psychological injury remains difficult for the legal system to address in a way that holds the perpetrator fully liable for the harm that he has inflicted. We had hoped by now that the legal definition of bodily harm would include psychological injury, but it does not.
As the 10-year mark of Gerda's death came closer, we started to talk about trying to really shift things, to try to raise awareness and maybe make some important changes in the law and in the services that are available for abused women. And we got together with Vanessa and we did this, what we feel is quite important work. One of the reasons we think it's important is because we really don't know an awful lot about the scale of suicidality in the UK for abused women. So this was a way of having a look at it. We wanted to try to ensure, as Nav said, that there are no more abused women who feel that suicide is the only way out.
We all need to do our bit to make sure that women across the country today experiencing domestic violence, who might be contemplating suicide, know that there are professionals to whom they can turn, and there are enough safe places to flee to.